The United States Navy just seized a cargo ship in the middle of the Arabian Sea. Not near a coastline, not inside a blockade zone, in open water. And what American forces pulled out of those containers may permanently rewrite the rules between Washington, Beijing, and Tehran. If you want to understand what's actually happening in this crisis before the mainstream media catches up, stay right here, because this story goes far deeper than a single ship. The MV Tuska had been warned for 6 straight hours. 6 hours of naval radio broadcasts from a U.S. destroyer. The ship did not stop, did not respond, did not change course. It kept pushing through the North Arabian Sea at 17 knots, headed for Bandar Abbas, Iran's primary southern military and commercial port. Then the USS Bruins disabled its engine room. Marines fast-roped from helicopters onto the deck in minutes. The crew was seized, the captain was detained, and the containers were locked down. What was inside those containers is now sitting in an American laboratory being analyzed with meticulous precision. The official cargo manifest has not been released, but Trump walked in front of a CNBC camera, looked directly into the lens, and said this: "We caught a ship that had some things on it which wasn't very nice. A gift from China, perhaps." That single sentence, delivered in a tone of casual certainty, was one of the most calculated diplomatic strikes of this entire crisis, and most people watching completely missed what it actually meant. Stay with me. Before we go further, if you're following the Iran crisis and you want real analysis delivered daily, not spin, not noise, drop a like right now. It tells us this work matters, and it helps more people find it. The MV Tuska was not a random cargo vessel. It was an Iranian-flagged ship that had departed from Zhuhai port in southern China, a port the Washington Post had previously identified as a location where Iran actively procures precursors for the rocket fuel used in its ballistic missile program. The Wall Street Journal describes the Tuska as part of a fleet accused of transporting chemicals for Iran's ballistic missile production. Other vessels from the same fleet had already moved over 1,000 tons of solid missile fuel precursors from China to Iran in the preceding 12 months alone. The specific materials allegedly on board this voyage included sodium perchlorate, electronic components, and metal pipes. That is not a random combination. Sodium perchlorate is the primary oxidizer in solid rocket fuel. Without it, Iran's Shahab and Ahmad-class ballistic missiles, weapons capable of striking targets from Riyadh to Tel Aviv, cannot be mass-produced at scale. The ship was not carrying fertilizer. It was not carrying construction materials. The operators knew exactly what was on board. And here's the detail that reveals everything. They ignored 6 hours of warnings from the United States Navy rather than allow that cargo to be inspected. You do not defy the most powerful naval force on Earth for 6 consecutive hours unless what you are carrying is worth more to you than the consequences of being caught. Now consider what was happening in Beijing on that exact same morning, because this is where the story stops being about one ship and starts being about something that will reshape global power for years. On the very day the Tuska was intercepted, Xi Jinping personally telephoned Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. According to Bloomberg, it was Xi's most explicit public statement against Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz. China's official position, delivered directly to the leader of the Gulf's most critical oil-producing state, was unambiguous. Hormuz must remain open, commercial navigation must be protected, and Iran's actions were destabilizing international trade. That was Beijing's public message. Simultaneously, a vessel linked to China's defense industry supply chain, departing from a port identified by American intelligence as a hub for Iranian weapons procurement, was running a 6,000-kilometer route toward Iran's primary military port, carrying materials entirely consistent with ballistic missile production. China told Saudi Arabia to open the strait, while a China-linked ship was running the blockade to deliver missile components to the country closing it. Those two positions cannot both be true. Either Beijing knew exactly what was on the Tuska, making its public statements to Riyadh a deliberate act of diplomatic misdirection, or the 40-year supply chain connecting Chinese defense-adjacent industries to Iranian weapons programs runs so deep and so autonomously that Beijing itself cannot fully control it. Neither answer is comfortable for Xi, and Trump's casual CNBC sentence put both options on the table simultaneously, in public, in a format that cannot be formally denied without making the situation considerably worse. This is important. If this analysis is giving you context you are not finding anywhere else, subscribe now. We cover this crisis every single day with the depth it actually deserves. Beijing's response came quickly, and it revealed everything. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs rejected what it called malicious association, describing the Tuska as a foreign container vessel rather than a Chinese ship. In the very same communication cycle, China expressed concern about the United States intercepting the Iranian ship. China simultaneously claimed no connection to the vessel and expressed alarm over its seizure. Both positions in the same breath. That is not a diplomatic phrasing error. That is the sound of an institution trying to occupy two mutually exclusive positions because neither one is survivable on its own. The 40-year history behind this single seizure is what gives Trump's casual comment its true weight. China's military cooperation with Iran began during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, when Beijing started supplying weapons to Tehran. In the post-Cold War era, China provided the CSS-8 tactical missiles that laid the foundation for Iran's Tandar ballistic missile program. It supplied C-802 anti-ship missiles, later versions of which are now in Houthi hands in Yemen. It transferred Silkworm missile technology in moves that triggered American sanctions precisely because they represented genuine military capability transferred under civilian cover. These transfers were never fully halted by international pressure. New companies emerged to replace sanctioned ones. New routes were developed to evade interdiction. New intermediaries were placed between the source and the destination. The underlying supply relationship persisted beneath changing corporate structures and rotating shipping manifests for 4 consecutive decades. The 25-year comprehensive strategic partnership that China and Iran formalized in recent years was publicly framed as an economic arrangement. Chinese investment and technology in exchange for Iranian oil. But American intelligence has long documented what sits beneath that civilian facade. Dual-use components supplied with specifications precisely matching military conversion requirements, structured through documentation crafted to provide plausible deniability for the actual purpose. The MV Tuska's departure from Zhuhai is the most concrete physical evidence that this supply chain continued uninterrupted across 4 decades of American sanctions, UN Security Council debates, and China's own repeated public commitments to non-proliferation principles. What American forces seized on that ship goes far beyond the cargo itself. Every container now in American custody is not just evidence about this single voyage. It is a window into the entire logistics architecture. Which companies supplied the materials? How payments were structured to obscure the transaction chain? Which shell companies served as intermediaries? Which ports functioned as transshipment nodes? Which logistics firms move cargo between its Chinese origin and its Iranian destination? Every node revealed by analyzing those containers is now permanently compromised. Iran cannot route the next shipment through the same companies, the same ports, the same logistics intermediaries. Every link American intelligence has mapped is a link that cannot be reused without guaranteed detection. Rebuilding the network requires starting from absolute zero on every element simultaneously. While under an economic blockade costing $500 million per day, while Iran's vital oil infrastructure is under pressure, while the IRGC and the diplomatic wing are fiercely contesting institutional control, and while the supreme leader remains in intensive care, unable to provide the authority the system desperately needs to function. The timing of this seizure is not incidental. It is structurally devastating. The geoeconomic implications extend far beyond Iran and directly into China's core vulnerability. China holds approximately 139 billion barrels of strategic petroleum reserve, roughly 120 days of consumption. Beijing has already moved to protect its domestic market by restricting refined fuel exports. But the real exposure sits with China's teapot refineries, the smaller independent processing facilities concentrated in Shandong province that account for roughly a quarter of total Chinese refining capacity. These refineries were built around one specific economic model: processing cheap, sanctioned Iranian crude purchased at a discount unavailable through any legitimate market channel. Their margins exist because the oil costs less than market price. When forced to compete for supply at full commercial pricing, those margins do not merely compress, they disappear. Below zero margins across a quarter of China's refining capacity does not produce an energy problem. It produces an energy crisis, arriving simultaneously as an employment crisis in one of China's most heavily industrialized provinces. The timeline for that crisis to manifest is not years, it is months. And stacked on top of that pressure is the fact that 42% of China's total crude imports come from Gulf states. Trade volume with the UAE alone exceeds $90 billion. Every Iranian missile that strikes Gulf infrastructure damages assets in which Chinese companies hold direct financial stakes. Every Shahed drone that hits a UAE facility destroys infrastructure Chinese capital helped build. The IRGC's escalation strategy is not merely a threat to American military operations. It is a systematic attack on the return of Chinese investments that Beijing has committed hundreds of billions of dollars and decades of diplomatic capital to establish. This fracture goes directly to the core of what was once presented as the trilateral Russia-China-Iran axis. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov appeared at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, condemning the American blockade as unlawful and expressing solidarity with Tehran. In the same statement, he announced that Russia stands ready to supply energy resources to China and other countries affected by the crisis. Moscow is performing solidarity while simultaneously advertising its readiness to replace Iran in the energy markets China urgently needs. Every barrel of Iranian oil that cannot reach China is a barrel Russia can now sell at prices Iran is no longer able to contest. Russia's energy revenues have doubled since the blockade began. China's desperation to secure alternative supply is deepening its dependence on Russian energy on terms increasingly favorable to Moscow. Russia is not saving Iran. It is monetizing Iran's collapse. China is not defending Iran. It is attempting to distance itself from the Tuska's cargo manifest while trying to preserve enough of the supply relationship to secure the discounted oil its refineries require. The Tuska seizure has made sustaining both of those positions simultaneously nearly impossible. The cargo is in American hands, the network is mapped, and Trump is holding the full evidence as leverage, running directly in parallel to trade negotiations with Beijing and nuclear talks in Islamabad. Consider the complete strategic picture the MV Tuska seizure has now permanently etched across the global order. A single cargo ship stopped in the North Arabian Sea has exposed a 40-year weapons supply network connecting China to Iran. It has placed permanent intelligence leverage in American hands, deployable simultaneously in trade negotiations, nuclear discussions, and regional diplomacy. It has demonstrated that U.S. maritime power can reach any vessel, on any route, anywhere on open water, regardless of flag, cover story, or diplomatic protection. It has fractured the Russia-China-Iran axis by making China's dual positioning publicly visible and diplomatically untenable. It has materially degraded Iran's near-term ballistic missile production capacity. It has mapped the entire logistics network, which must now be rebuilt from absolute zero under maximum surveillance pressure. And it has delivered all of this through a single boarding operation lasting mere minutes, requiring no diplomatic approval, generating no meaningful military response from any party, and producing evidence that will remain in American custody, influencing calculations for years. The Strait of Hormuz has seen extraordinary events since this crisis began. Carrier strike groups, naval blockades, clandestine fleet seizures, and tankers turning back within minutes of approaching the enforcement line. But April 19th was categorically different. This was not another ship seizure. This was the unmasking of a covert supply network, and China cannot undo it. It cannot retrieve the containers, it cannot prevent the analysis from continuing, it cannot unsay what Trump said on camera. It cannot make the 40-year network invisible again, now that its full architecture has been illuminated. For Iran, the same reality applies. It cannot rebuild what was seized without doing so under the surveillance of an intelligence apparatus that now possesses the complete operational map of how the previous network functioned. Trump's comment about a gift from China was not a throwaway line. It was a message engineered to be quoted, to be remembered, and to be understood by Xi in the context of trade negotiations, by Iran in the context of nuclear talks, by Gulf states in the context of American commitment, and by every corporate intermediary that has been servicing this supply chain for 4 decades. The message is direct and it is complete. We found your network. We have the evidence. We know every node, and we are holding it until the exact moment it produces the outcome we are building toward. Something fundamental just shifted in the Arabian Sea. The most decisive part was not the Marines on the deck. It was not the disabled engine room. It was not the seized crew. It is what is sitting in an American laboratory right now, being documented, being prepared, and waiting for the moment it changes everything for China, for Iran, and for the global order that runs through the maritime routes where American power just proved it can reach anywhere, at any time, without warning. That is what the MV Tuska actually delivered, and unlike the ship itself, that message will not be returned. If this gave you real clarity on what is unfolding in real time, share this video with one person who needs to understand it. Drop your take in the comments. Do you think China knew exactly what was on that ship, or does the supply chain truly run beyond Beijing's control? That answer matters more than most people realize. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the right time. This crisis is moving fast, and we break down every major development every single day. No spin, no filler, just the full picture.